And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Most Reverend and Right Honourable Lord Bishop of Archbishop of York, Stephen Cockle. Thank you very much for being with us.
Stuart, Debbie, sisters and brothers, it's really nice to be with you. I have to say, my commitment to the rural church is really, really strong, as I hope may become apparent, or perhaps might even be apparent. My first-hand knowledge is much more limited. So if you looked at my CV, most of my ministry prior to becoming a bishop was in urban contexts. So I always feel slightly uncomfortable when I get up to speak, especially when I look at who's in the room and know that I'm in the presence of people who know far more about this than I do. But since I've become a bishop, I found myself working in three contexts which have been beautifully, deeply rural, and I've had to learn a lot. So first of all, as Bishop of Reading, the West Berkshire and the Berkshire Downs and all those communities. Then it's not often so well known that the Diocese of Chelmsford, North Essex, is vast and very, very rural. I used to say to many people who didn't understand just how rural Essex is, you know that column in the Church Times that's been running since 1731, a word from Wormingford. Where's Wormingford? Now, most people think it's in Herefordshire or somewhere like that. It's not. It's in Essex. And now, as Bishop of this Diocese of York, yes, we've got Middlesbrough and Hull, but North Yorkshire is pretty rural. So I speak to you as somebody who is a learner, but who has learned a lot, and who's trying to reflect on how do we bring life, energy, revitalisation to the whole ecosystem of the church, and therefore to the rural church. And I'm not going to make too many great claims for achieving much, but I do hope that those of you in this room, indeed the whole Synod, will be very encouraged by the fact that as we move into this next chapter of funding, rural now is firmly in the picture as being part of that whole ecosystem that we want to see thrive and flourish. So it's good to be with you. Stuart, Debbie, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for setting up this group within the Synod. I think that's a great encouragement to those of us who do care about the rural church and want to see it thrive. A little plug for this book, which I'm sure you're aware of, but just in case you're not, it was launched here at Synod just a day or two ago, How Village Churches Thrive. It's a really, really helpful resource. I've got 5 things I want to say and share with you. And you know, I'm kind of embarrassed to share this with you because I'm sure you got to these places way before me, but these seem to me to be 5 things that are really important for us to reflect on. And in each case, they're things where I think the rural church is leading the way, but of course also needs to do more work itself. First is, we need to stop treating all churches as if they're the same. I think the idea of understanding the church as an ecosystem, which obviously is itself an idea that we take from our observation of the natural world, is a really helpful image, because we know that in almost every other bit of the world, things thrive because of diversity. And therefore cherishing and building up our diversity is the way the whole ecosystem grows and flourishes. So therefore, what I've observed in rural churches, particularly when a deanery is working together at its best, is not imagining that every single church needs to be treated in quite the same way. And so it's okay, for instance, for a church to become a festival church. It's okay for different churches to work together with different specialisms. And in many cases, I think rural churches are liberated when they're helped to understand that it's okay to be a very successful home group and not to think of yourself as a failing cathedral. Second thing is, which I've already alluded to, is think deanery as well as parish. And again, I see in the best examples of the rural church where I've served, it's often been when there's that collaboration and shared vision of an ecosystem across a deanery, which of course also includes the ecumenical as well. It's actually thinking of who are the other players in our locality. Now, again, of course, I know that in most cases, most other denominations have withdrawn from the countryside and we're the only church left. But that also means we're being ecumenical in a different way, welcoming the whole Christian community into our churches in a way that doesn't happen still in urban areas. And what I see the rural church doing, which excites me, is doing things as a deanery which no single church could do on its own. Thirdly, I think it's good to think ministry, not just vicar. And again, I see the rural church often leading the way in this. A good example would be, I remember going to, early on in my time as Bishop of Reading, going to a multi-parish benefice. Now, this might be a controversial thing to say, and so you can come back at me and disagree with me. You may see it differently or have experienced it differently. But I remember going to a multi-parish benefice where it seemed to me, coming in from outside, that the best thing to do was to make them into one parish, therefore with one PCC meeting and one set of church wardens. But the individual parishes were very resistant to that, and they were resistant to it not just for pastoral but also for missional reasons. They said to me, the reason we can maintain our identity as the church in this village is because we have our own church wardens and we have our own PCC. And it's that which is keeping the church alive. We're very glad to have a vicar. We wish we could have more share of that vicar, but we don't actually want to become one parish. Now, this is where one size will never fit all, and different deaneries and different places have to find different solutions. But I think what it does point to is the importance of place in the rural church, the importance of the church building, and I think the importance of the church officers. Now, again, don't think I'm in cloud cuckoo land. I know that one of the biggest challenges facing the rural church is finding officers. But where we can, the continuity of those things is one of the ways that we maintain our presence and our identity. And then there are other things that we need to develop in the Church of England, such as focal ministry, which again is another area where sometimes I see the rural church taking the lead, the use of self-supporting and authorised lay ministry. And the other thing I wanted to mention as well is rural chaplaincy. When I was Bishop of Chelmsford, we had the most outstanding priest as our rural chaplain. As it happened, she came from a farming family, so she was brilliantly networked into all the family communities in North Essex. But her ministry made a massive difference to the whole ministry of the church in rural areas. And I know that sometimes it's very easy to point a finger at, another post at the centre. But if you get that post right and have somebody who can work to facilitate the whole ministry of the church, it's amazing what a difference it makes. Fourthly, there's only 5. Fourthly, there's something I want to say, again, perhaps to provoke some discussion, something about what I'm going to call the exchange between being distinctive and being engaged. Let me just explain what I mean. The thing that I observe in the rural church is it's very, very, very good at being engaged in its community. So everybody knows everybody. The officers of the church are also the officers usually of all sorts of other things in the village community. And it's fabulous the way the rural church is engaged. But sometimes it's not very distinctive. The urban church, on the other hand, is often too distinctive. It's very, very distinctive, and it's unengaged with its community. And I think one of the things I want to say to urban and suburban churches is, if you really want to take forward your mission, you've got to become much more engaged in your community, rather than being, just a little gathered congregation doing its stuff on Sunday morning and then disappearing. But the rural church, I think there is a challenge, is what is the distinctive Christian voice, the distinctive Christian witness that we can bring to our community? And that's where I think the rural church, in my experience, does need a bit of challenge. Also related to this is I kind of thought to myself, if I could do one thing for the buildings, and by that also by extension the ministry of every village church, let's say in this diocese where I serve here in Yorkshire, what's the one thing I'd like to do in every building? I'd like to install two things. I'd like to install a toilet and a votive candle stand. They're the two things I'd like to put into every church. And for me, they point to two distinctively important things about the village church. I think we need to recover the medieval vision of the English parish church. And the medieval vision of the English parish church is that the parish church was the place of meeting for the whole community. As you probably know, there's wonderful stories of how it was the parish church where the plough was stored during winter. Why? Because it was the only large enough building to use in the whole community. Now, of course, village halls then came in. The Victorians, frankly, have got a lot to answer for, because they put in pews. Pews, as you know, are a nasty modern invention. I'm a traditionalist. And the English parish church for centuries was an empty space so that it could be flexible in its use, not just on Sundays, but throughout the week. I think we need to recover the English medieval vision of the parish church as the meeting place for the whole community, not least because we've sold off most of our village halls and our church halls. We don't even have them anymore. If we still had them, maybe it wouldn't matter so much. So we need to be bold in thinking about how we can recover. You know, the Victorians had this funny idea that a church is only a holy place. It's a very funny idea. And we need to recover a much older tradition of the English parish church. It's a building for the whole community 7 days a week. But it's not just, and therefore my toilet is kind of emblematic of, we need to make our buildings work so that we can use them for all sorts of purposes in order to bless the communities we serve. But the other thing I want to put in is a votive candle stand. Because also, the village church is the holy place. There's a huge revival of interest in pilgrimage in our nation at the moment. Huge revival of interest, which should be of great interest to us. Because yes, there's the great places to go on pilgrimage, you know, Walsingham and Holy Island and Canterbury and York. But there's also your local church. Your local church is your local holy place. And we should be encouraging people to come on pilgrimage to your local holy place, and therefore simply to ask ourselves the question, I know you've done this, I'm not suggesting you haven't done this, but we need to put renewed emphasis into it, is when you come into this local holy place, yes, we need our toilets and our running water so that we can do things in our buildings, and if possible we need to clear out some of the pews that the Victorians put in, but we also need it to be a holy place. Visibly to be a holy place where people can come, whether there's a service going on or not, come and encounter the beauty and the otherness of God. For me, symbolised by there's somewhere where I can light a candle and do something and say a prayer, whether I come in on a Wednesday afternoon or a Sunday morning. So it's that distinctiveness, that's my votive candle stand, and then my engagedness make these buildings work. And here also, I mean, I just want to note in passing that the great work that the rural church has done in serving its community with food banks, social isolation, community hubs, being often in the forefront of ecological work. There's so much I could say, there isn't time, because I think I've probably already overrun my time. And so finally, I want to speak about, could we have a big vision of saying, we want to be the rural avant-garde? we want to be in the forefront of showing the whole Church of England what paying attention to the ecosystem of a whole church looks like, and how fostering diversity in our multi-parish benefices and in our deaneries will show the rest of the church how every church can flourish, but every church does not need to be the same. At this point, I'll sit down.